Okay, what I wanted to show you next is something pretty important to know how to do in Revit, and that is creating a customized wall. A lot of the times when I'm doing Revit projects, I'll find that the walls that come preloaded in Revit, which what we see over here, all these different generic and exterior walls and interior walls, almost none of them really work for any of the given Revit projects that I work on. And I end up having to create a custom wall. If I can see what the different layers or the different components that make up the wall are, and I know what their thicknesses are, I can modify one of these walls and use it in my project. So let me give you an example of how to do that. Let's just pretend I've got a drawing right here. This is kind of a typical condition that you might find in the field. This is a brick veneer wall, and what we can see here is that there is 3 5/8 thickness of brick on the outside of the wall. Then heading into the wall, we have a 1 inch air gap space, and then a 1/4 of an inch of sheathing here. The stud that's actually doing the heavy lifting that's supporting the wall is 5.5 inches deep, and then there's 1/2 inch of gypsum board on the inside. This is a kind of a typical wall type, what you might actually find in an actual built building. The whole assembly comes to 10 7/8 of an inch in depth, and there is no wall type in Revit that really perfectly matches that. When you're doing projects in Revit, you want it to perfectly match what we're doing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to imagine that this wall type that we're looking at right here, this kit of parts, needs to be included in the house on the hill that we're constructing. So I am on right now, I'm on the floor plans 02 entry level, and I'm just going to imagine that for whatever reason, this particular wall right here needs to be constructed out of these materials with these thicknesses to them. So here's how we're going to do that. And this is something this applies not only to walls, you can do the same trick using floor slabs or roof types, but we're going to take an existing wall and we're going to modify it and we're going to give it the properties that we want. So to do that, the first thing I want to do is actually select this wall right here. So it is highlighted in blue. Then I'm going to go over here to our properties of the wall and we're going to hit edit type. If I click on edit type, this is how we're going to do this. We hit duplicate and we say okay. It gives it a duplicate name, generic 6-inch Mark II, and we're going to say okay. So we've created a duplicate wall type. Now we're going to rename this wall type and we're going to name it something that allows us to know what it is that we're working with. So I'm going to say 10 7/8 inch brick exterior wall. And I'm going to hit OK. So what I did was I took an existing wall, I hit duplicate, OK, and then I renamed it and hit OK. Now the properties that, since we've duplicated it and renamed it, the properties that we assigned to this wall won't affect any of the other walls in our project. We're just going to assume that the other walls, I want to keep those the same. This wall in particular gets the change. And what we're going to do is we're really creating a new wall type that you can use further on in this project. If you need to create other walls and make them this wall type, it's now a wall type you can use. If you need to modify some of these existing walls and turn them into this 10 7/8 inch brick exterior wall, you can do that as well. We're taking an existing wall type and we're duplicating it and changing it into a new wall type. So once we hit duplicate, OK, rename, OK, we're now going to change the properties. So we're going to go up here to structure, and where it says edit, we're going to edit it. And when this window comes up, this edit assembly window, I want you to go down to this button here in the lower left hand corner called preview. If we click on preview, we get a little graphic of what the cross section of this wall currently looks like. Up here, this is the outside of the wall. Down here, this is the inside. And we only have one layer right now called structure. It's just this generic, unassigned material, 6-inch thick structure. Let's go back to our illustration here. we want to add some layers here. We've got a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 layers here that we need to replicate in our model. So what I want you to do is go to here, go to Insert, and hit it 4 times. Each time it's going to insert a new layer. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we now have a total of 5 layers, and we're going to simply change these layers to become what we want the new wall to be. So what I'm going to do is just kind of go up to this top layer. It's already highlighted, and under the column listed as function, I'm going to hit the drop-down menu, and I'm going to call this, of all the choices that we have, I'm going to call this Finish 1. I'm going to just set up the rule that on the exterior side, Finish 1 is the outside finish. When I get down to here, I'm going to call this Finish 2, and that will be on the inside. So Finish 1 is on the outside here. And the material, I'm going to click on this. I'm going to look for a brick material that I like. So I'm going to scroll down in alphabetical order. And here's brick common, as opposed to brick soldier course. This is just how the bricks are laid, how they're laid in their courses. This is just an ordinary brick wall. So I'm going to hit brick common, and I'm going to hit OK. And I'm going to go over to our thickness, and we can look at our drawing here, and we can see that this brick needs to be 3 5/8 of an inch deep. So I go back to here and I type in 3 space 5/8 inches. And I go down to the next row. And you can see here's our 3 5/8 of an inch deep brick on the outside face of our wall. It shows up on our little graphic here. This will be really helpful. The next layer that we want to create is 1 inch of air gap right behind the brick. So where it says structure, I'm going to go to the drop-down menu, and I'm going to call it thermal/air layer. And for material, I think we can actually go down to the drop-down and look. There's an air layer under A. So we'll hit OK. And let's see, that air layer is 1 inch deep. So I'm going to go here, and I'm going to type in 1 inch, tab, or enter. Now I'll go down to the next layer. The next layer, I need to see what it is sheathing that goes on the back of the studs, and it's 1/4 of an inch thick. So let's go here. Let's change this to substrate. Substrate really means sheathing. For material, we're going to look for some kind of, I think in Revit it's like plywood sheathing. So we're going to scroll down to the P's. Here it is, plywood sheathing right here, and we hit OK. And the thickness of that is, you can just type in 0.25 inches, tab, it changes it to 1/4 of an inch. And check it out, over here, here's the outside of our wall, here's the inside of our wall. We're working our way from the outside in. We've got brick at 3 5/8 of an inch, 1 inch air gap, and 1/4 inch of sheathing right here. So the next thing we're going to do, let's look at our picture. 5 1/2 inch stud comes next. So let's go to that. Over here, this time the 5 1/2 inch stud actually is the structure. It's the wood studs that are holding up the building. So we're going to leave row 5 as structure. And for material, we're going to look for studs. We might just have to, I can't remember if, here it is. Let's see, structure, wood joist. This isn't quite what we want. Actually, let's do this. Let's say we've got structure, wood, joist, layer, bat, insulation. That's under the S's here. Let's choose that because I think it will show insulation, kind of that soft Owens Corning insulation in between the wood studs. So let's say we'll say structure, wood, and we'll say thickness 5 1/2 inches. The reason we say 5 1/2 inches is because that is the nominal dimension of a 2x6. A 2x6 is not really 2 inches by 6 inches in cross section. It's 1 1/2 inches by 5 1/2 inches. But 2x6s are what contractors use to do exterior walls. But the actual dimension, it's not 6 inches deep, it's 5 1/2 inches deep. So we're putting the actual dimensions of these things. That's why we've got a weird dimension like 3 5/8 of an inch. That's the actual depth of a brick. Since this is the structure and this is doing the heavy lifting, we are actually going to put a check mark in this column here, structure material. You can only have one structure material in a wall assembly that's doing the heavy lifting. So when we put the check mark here, the check mark vanishes from the other box. Revit just likes to track um, which layer of your kit of parts is actually the structure, actually holding things up. I think the last layer now is 1/2 inch of gypsum board on the inside. So if we go here, layer 6 or row 6, we're going to change that to finish 2 to differentiate it from finish 1 up here. We're going to call this material drywall or gypsum board. Let's look for the, it's probably under, here it is, under the G's, gypsum wall board. We'll hit OK, and we'll change this to 0.5 inches. You can use decimals or fractions here. Revit will make the transition. So we've got all of our kit of parts, all the stuff that we're seeing here, our 3 5/8 inch brick, our 1 inch air gap, our 1/4 inch sheathing, our 5 1/2 inch deep stud, and our 1/2 inch of gypsum board. That is all replicated right here. Here are all our layers, and here's the explanation of everything. And you can see in our little illustration, we're told that the thickness of this wall, the depth of the wall, is 10 7/8 of an inch. If we go here, Revit will add up all these thicknesses, and it will show it right here. Total thickness 10 7/8 of an inch. This will change if these numbers were to change. So Revit tracks all this. Everything looks pretty good. Now we've got these 2 gray layers here. They're called core boundary layers. And I think Revit just wants to isolate what it is that's doing the heavy lifting. So we want a gray core boundary layer above and below our structure layer. So to make that happen, let's click row number 2. Let's click on the number 2 right here, and we'll just move that up. And we'll click on number 3 right here, and we'll move that up. And we'll click on number 4, substrate, and move that up. Now you'll see that the gray boundary is immediately above our structure layer. In the same way, we can click on Finish 2 and move it down. And now we've got the 2 gray layers that indicate the 2 sides of this structure layer. They're flanking. They're on either side of this. Nothing has changed over here. Our kit of parts hasn't changed. It's just Revit likes to kind of isolate the structure layer with these gray layers. It will have no bearing on what we're doing in the creation of this wall. So now, once we've got our kit of parts all assembled and we're happy with how it's looking, we hit OK. Before we hit OK here, we're going to look at 2 other things here, wrapping at inserts and wrapping at ends. Wrapping at inserts is simply that Revit is asking if we were to put a hole in this wall, like maybe to insert a door or a window. If we were to put a hole or an opening in this wall and we looked at this opening from the side, do we want to see the brick wrapping all the way around the opening here, or do we want this gypsum board to wrap around the opening and kind of die on this front face? Or do we want the brick and the gypsum board to kind of meet in the middle to wrap around that opening somewhere else? If we go to wrapping at inserts, we've got those choices. We could have the exterior wrap around. We could have the interior wrap around that opening, the face of the opening, or we could just say both. We could have the brick and the gypsum board kind of wrap around and meet in the middle of the side of an opening. And that's the way buildings typically are. So we're going to say both. Wrapping at ends is kind of a less common occurrence. What wrapping at ends is asking if this brick just kind of if a row of this brick wall just stopped and there was nothing that it was dying into and you could see the end of this brick wall, would we want the brick to wrap around the end, or would we want the inside finish, the gypsum board, to wrap around the end? We don't have an option here to have both. So I'm just going to say exterior, although that condition rarely happens. Walls always tend to die into another wall, as opposed to just stopping and being freestanding on one end. So wrapping at inserts, we're going to say both. Wrapping at ends, we're going to say exterior. At this point, we're going to hit OK, and take a look at it. We can see that our brick wall is now there. If you set your detail level to fine, you'll actually see the different layers of material. But here it is. Here's our brick wall that we created. It was originally, if I click on this wall, it was originally a generic 6-inch wall. That's what we turned into our 10 7/8 of an inch brick wall. So this brick wall has gained 4 7/8 of an inch. It's gotten almost 5 inches thicker. If we click on the wall, we can see our location line is at the core face interior. Our location line for this wall is running down the middle of it. And what that means is, as we turn this wall into a new wall type, as it's gotten thicker, the inside has pushed in a little bit more and the outside has pushed in a little bit more. The thing that remains consistent is the midpoint, the line running down the middle of the wall. That's our location line. That remains unchanged. And so that added thickness eats a little bit into the inside and a little bit to the outside. So that's our new wall type there. If we wanted to, we could actually turn some of these other walls into the same condition, and I'll show you how. There's a great command here on the Modify tab. If we click on Modify, we've got a command here called Match Type Properties. And if you click on that, and you click on our new wall we created and click on another wall, it will give that new wall the same properties as the wall we just selected. So match type properties is a great tool to use if you've got one component made, modeled the way you want it to be, and you need to apply those properties to another wall. You can just use that match type properties command right here to select the source properties and then click on everything that needs to be modified to those source properties. This is a trick I use all the time, modifying an existing wall type, changing the layers, changing the thickness of the layers to make a new wall type that matches exactly what I need it to be. Especially if you're building a Revit model of some kind of existing building. If you've got a real building and you've got actual measurements of what comprise the walls and how thick things are, you'll want to use this little trick here. Duplicate, OK, rename, OK, and then change the properties. All right, that's it for modifying and customizing your wall types. That concludes this lecture.